should we continue to be anonymous, or do we really need to reveal who we are in order to speak up? And, Ed, I know that's actually a question you face pretty directly about it. And I'd love to hear, because I think people are struggling with, sometimes when you're doing this kind of work, you do need to think about your threat model and whether your identity would be, could increase danger to you or others, or whether it couldn't. And so I thought I would ask you.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really an individual choice, and that's the central thing there. It needs to always be an available choice, because it's different for everyone. When I was in Hawaii, basically gathering evidence of crimes by the most powerful government in the history of the planet, and trying to secretly coordinate with journalists in order to inform the public without getting caught, so the story couldn't be stopped, right? These journalists had no training. They had no understanding or awareness. The NSA had these capabilities. They didn't know how the federal government was going to investigate. They didn't know, particularly back then, how trivially easy it was to hack an identified system. Just send an email with a phishing link to one of these guys that were popping back then. So I had to, do the best I could to kind of train them generally to use things like the Tails operating system, to use things like Tor to route their communications, which was enforced by default on this, which is why I made them do that. To use PGP, so we're not just on Gmail, sending things in the clear to anybody who, can stamp a warrant, basically, or even worse, a subpoena in many cases. But even with that, there was no way that they could protect me because they didn't know the risks. It was hard enough for me to try to protect myself. And so the only way that I could coordinate with them, the only way that I could communicate with them, the only way that I could risk giving them information that could put me in jail for the rest of my life, and very likely, or was most likely to put me in jail for the rest of my life, was for them not to know who I was. And this protected them, it protected me. Like, if there was no anonymity possible, it would have been very difficult for me to justify taking that kind of risk. And this was even with me knowing there was basically a burning fuse where I would, regardless, be identified. My identity would be discovered. I would be known, right? But I needed that space. I needed that moment. We needed to be able to carve out just a few weeks in the year that we could talk in confidence with each other to discuss, is this something that the world should know? They ultimately agreed that it did, and the rest is history. And we succeeded. The NSA found out basically when it hit the news, or very shortly before. But not everybody's in that situation, right? Not everybody wants that. Not everybody needs that. But for those who do, it should be available, and it should be much easier. You shouldn't need to, be a former CIA, former NSA, whatever, in order to talk to a journalist in confidence about something that you believe is of vital public importance. And if we lose that, in many cases we already have, it's very, very, very difficult to maintain meaningful anonymity, particularly against these top-level actors. Though it is still possible, it requires a level of technical sophistication that in many cases is unfair to just presume that any arbitrary member of society should be able to, clear this bar. And I think it's tragic that the situation is where it is, where things like anonymity, things like privacy are becoming either luxury products or perks that are only available to an expert class. And we very much need to sort of make that more egalitarian, make that more universally available. On the other hand, is it required? Is it necessary? Should we all be anonymous all the time? I don't think we need to. And I think attaching your name to something does provide a mark of credibility. That's why, in large part, I came forward. So the government can't simply say this is made up or whatever, because I knew they were immediately going to charge me with a whole buffet of felonies, which they did. And they can't now say, oh, he made it all up, because they go, well, we charged him for basically taking these documents. Obviously, they came from somewhere.